Ye namarupa kriyadatye sakarma karma kaha paraha sakarma karma kaha paraha sahahi vajya by his forms and activities, vajjakataya by his transcendental qualities and entourage, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Brahma, absolute, Rupadrik, by accepting visible forms, Nama, name, Rupa, form, Kriya, pastimes, Date, accepts, Sakarma, engaged in work, Akarmakaha, without being affected, Praha, transcendence. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhayacharya Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jaya. Translation. He, the personality of Godhead, manifests himself in the transcendental form, being the subject of his transcendental name, quality, pastimes, entourage, and transcendental variegatedness. Although he is unaffected by all such activities, he appears to be so engaged. Purport. Whenever there is a need of material creation, the transcendental personality of Godhead accepts forms in the material world for creation, maintenance, and destruction. One should be intelligent enough to know his activities in truth and not be biased to conclude that he descends to the material world by accepting a form created by material nature. Any form accepted from the material nature has its affection for everything done in the material world. A conditioned soul who accepts a material form for undergoing a certain term of material activities is subjected to the laws of matter. But here in this verse it is clearly stated that although the forms and activities of the Lord appear to be the same as those of a conditioned soul, they are supernatural and impossible for the conditioned soul. He, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is always unaffected by such activities. In the Bhagavad Gita 4.14, the Lord says, Namam karmani limpanti nami karma palispriha iti mam yo bichanati karma virna sabatyate. The Lord is never affected by the activities which he apparently performs by his different incarnations and personalities, nor does he have any desire to achieve success by fruitive activities. The Lord is full by his different potencies of wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge and renunciation, and thus he has no reason for physical exertion, like the conditioned soul. Therefore, an intelligent person who can distinguish between the transcendental activities of the Lord and the activities of the conditioned souls is also not bound by the reactions of activities. The Lord, as Vishnu, Brahma and Shiva, conducts the three modes of material nature. From Vishnu is born Brahma, and from Brahma is born Shiva. Sometimes Brahma is a separated part of Vishnu, and sometimes Brahma is Vishnu himself. Thus Brahma creates the different species of life all over the universe, which means that the Lord creates the whole manifestation, either by himself or through the agency of his authorized deputies. Om Kyanati Mirandasya Kananshana Shalakaya Chaksharon Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Karamayam Durate Svaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utta Parakalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrachatam Sahaganarakodatam Vitam Tam Sachivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Goranga Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhana Sutedevi Pranamami Hare Priya Vancha Kalpadarabhascha Kripa Sindhyabhevaja Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we're in this last famous chapter of the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the answer to all questions. And yeah, as we heard in those last series of classes, we discussed in this chapter first, it's the famous verse Atra Sarga Visargashta, describing the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, and by explaining that it is all the other 9 topics are simply to drive home the point of the necessity to understand and take shelter of the 10th topic, which is Krishna himself, the summum bonum, the ashraya of all the other topics. And after so far, mostly then we, after brief description of all the topics, otherwise this chapter focus on the sarga, on the first topic, on the Lord's creation of this material world. We know Visarga is then the secondary creation conducted by Lord Brahma, and we heard so the sarga done by Mahavishnu. We heard specifically in the understanding of how it comes in the form of the Viradrupa, of the Lord's universal form. So to make us understand that, yeah, even the material world, it does depend on a Supreme Person, and to help us understand that we can even conceive of the material world itself as being a personal body of the Lord, as the Viradrupa. Although we know, actually, of course, as we heard now in the last few verses, that is not the form that the devotees meditate on, because they know that is not the Lord's real form. It's not the transcendental, eternal, most beautiful, enchanting form of the Lord. Rather, it is simply a way to conceive of even of the material universe as being the Lord's body. And so we heard in the last few verses about that completely beyond this gross manifestation of Viradrupa is the Lord's eternal transcendental form itself, which is the summum bonum, which is the ashraya of all the other things. Because after all, we know from Krishna's original form as Shyamasundara, Gopinath, from him emanates everything else, including first Lord Brahma, Srimati Radharani, and then, not Lord Brahma, Lord Balaram, and from Lord Balaram then the Chaturvyas, the first and the second one, with all the different forms then also of Lord Vishnu, of Lord Narayan in the spiritual world, and also then from Mahavishnu being the first Purusha, then Garbhodakashaya Vishnu and Kiridakashaya Vishnu, which are the forms for the material creation, but still they themselves are fully transcendental. But yeah, it shows who is the real Ashraya. It is Krishna. Even those other transcendental forms of the Lord, they depend still on Krishna. And so, like Prabhupada started off the purport here, that whenever there's a need of material creation, the transcendental personality of Godhead accepts forms in the material world for creation, maintenance, and destruction. And so it is, first of all, still the Lord personally in his 3 Purusha avatars, and then which is still the Lord, personally the Lord himself, with full of unlimited potencies and fully transcendental. But still further, then actually he also, specifically, Prabhupada mentions here, for creation, maintenance, and destruction, we know then there's also the guna avatars, who are then Lord Vishnu, still the Lord himself, of course, for maintenance, for sattva gun, mode of goodness, and then for creation, as we mentioned, for the secondary creation, that is then Lord Brahma, which is, as we hear later in the purport, generally the most highly qualified jiva in that universe, living entity, just like you and me, but extremely elevated, the most pious, and thus, a devotee of the Lord, but not the Lord himself, but specifically empowered by the Lord for creation, being the superintendent of the mode of passion, and Lord Shiva, of course, for the dissolution, for the mode of ignorance, but Lord Shiva, we know even though as a pastime, he like we hear in Bhagavatam later here also, that he does appear from Lord Brahma, So in other words, Lord Brahma is his father, but actually, Lord Shiva is actually beyond Lord Brahma. Lord Shiva is in between Shiva Tattva and Vishnu Tattva. So he is actually how it's described, how the Lord himself directly then interacts and touches the material nature. When Lord Mahavishnu, we know the Sarga, the primary creation, it all still depends on the personal touch of the Lord. But how does he do it? He doesn't personally, in his personal form, engage, but rather he simply glances at material nature. And that glance is said, that's Shambhu, that's Lord Shiva. So Vishnu himself doesn't directly touch material nature, but rather that is then Lord Shiva, and who is, here in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he's compared to like, if you say Lord Vishnu is like a milk, then Lord Shiva is like yogurt. It's still nothing else other than milk, but you can't turn yogurt back into milk. So in that way, he's still, not comparable to any other jivas, but still he's not the Lord himself. So that's the guna avatars, and Lord Brahma, which we here later in the purport also, that sometimes the Lord himself has to take the position of Lord Brahma in one particular universe where there is no jiva qualified to do that service. Because as we heard discussed some weeks ago about the importance of Lord Brahma's service to the Lord, actually, that even just not even what to speak of him being the head of our sampradaya and thus a great spiritual master and delivering so many souls in that way, bringing the transcendental knowledge. So we had discussed in the Chatushloki how he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam originally from the Lord in those 4 verses and expanded that further to Narad Muni, then Narad Muni to Vyasadeva, and that's how we got the Bhagavatam. But what to speak of that? But even creation itself is such an important service because it's still the Lord's desire only to give us the facility but to do it then also so perfectly and always with the eye to fully facilitate us to go back to Godhead again. Because after all, the Lord is personal, and so he doesn't, just because we misuse our independence and we want to forget him and get away from him, doesn't mean that the Lord wants to forget us and get away from us. It gives him actually, like Prabhupada explains in some purports, or also I read in the small book Path of Perfection, which is basically about all the verses from Bhagavad Gita from 6th and 8th chapter, which are directly about Ashtanga Yoga, where they compiled those the lectures that Prabhupada gave on these, and along with some parts of the purports from Bhagavad Gita. And so there, at one point, Prabhupada explains how actually how much pain we do give to the Lord by wanting to forget him, by wanting to enjoy the material world. So even though as today also we hear, the Lord is never affected by material nature, he is always self-sufficient and self-satisfied. So he doesn't depend on us, but still, even though it's Atmaram, as we discussed recently also about how still in another sense he still does depend on others for his pleasure, namely in the sense of getting unconditional love, because otherwise there's nothing to gain for Krishna. Everything comes from him. He's inexhaustible. As we hear today also about the 6 opulences, like unlimited beauty, unlimited wealth, unlimited strength, unlimited renunciation, unlimited, what else is there? Strength, pronunciation, fame, of course, and knowledge. Yeah. So, yeah, there's no. He's not in need of anything, and he's fully cannot be affected by anything. He's by nature Satchid Ananda Vigraha, so he's by nature full of bliss, and thus, yeah, he doesn't need anyone to be blissful, but still, his already unlimited pleasure can increase even more by, reciprocating with his pure devotees in unconditional love, and so that's the only thing. So we can say that is there to gain for Krishna, and that is why he, first explained as Srimati Radharani, that the first personality of his Shakti, the supreme personality of the energy of Shakti, you can say. She is, she is Latini Shakti personified. She is the pleasure potency personified. Because for Krishna, still to get more pleasure, to enjoy pleasure, there is a need, as we read that recently from in one purport in third canto. Prabhupada explains about when Krishna wants to enjoy, he has to create a woman from his own internal potency. And that is also the reason why then in material world the perverted reflection is also that sex pleasure is the highest material pleasure. And because originally the material world, in the spiritual world, that is also how Krishna enjoys the most by, in the most intimate loving exchanges with, in conjugal love with Srimati Radharani and the other gopis and everyone assisting in that. And so we discussed about how the Lord still get, in that sense, depends on others for anchor. Yes, sorry, that's so the importance of Lord Brahma's service of secondary creation. It is important that it is properly done to enable the conditioned souls to give up, rectify their wrong mentality of lording over material nature, and again give their unconditional love to the Lord. And so that is why if there is no one qualified enough for the post of Lord Brahma, the Lord even himself does the job of Lord Brahma. And it is that Lord Brahma, actually, it's mentioned somewhere, because when I first read it I was a bit confused that there's many different forms of Vishnu mentioned. I think it must be in the 5th canto somewhere, who are guarding, I forgot what exactly, but some part in the universe. Or is it, maybe it's in Chaitanya Charitamrita about, I think about Dwarka, about one of the Lord's abodes where there's all the different Vishnu forms guard the abode, protect it. And one of them mentioned there's Lord Brahma, and initially I was confused. So Lord Brahma is not Vishnu form, but then I came across it somewhere that, of course, that is this Lord Brahma, which so there is a form of Lord Brahma which is Lord Vishnu. Because if that's what it means, if Lord Vishnu sometimes has to take the position of Lord Brahma, or like become a Lord Brahma in one universe, that means also that the form of Lord Brahma is also there as Vishnu himself, because we know all the Lord's forms are eternal. So it is such a Lord Brahma can also be Vishnu. So let's continue what Prabhupada said in the purport. And so Prabhupada then pointed out that even though we know, like in terms of the guna avatars, that the Lord takes material forms, that one should be intelligent enough to understand still that the Lord can never be material, that He is never comparable to conditioned souls who get, due to their undue desire to lord over material nature, that they get thrown into this whirlpool of material existence and awarded one material body after the other. So, that's Daivina Nitrana. That's by the supervision and control of the Lord ultimately, of destiny, meaning that according to our karma, according to our deeds, we get what we deserve, and according to our desires, in other words, how we associate with the material modes, which is always changing. The three modes there, like Krishna explains himself in Bhagavad Gita, how the modes themselves, they are fighting. Sometimes mode of goodness has the upper hand at one, and like in different, it's also dependent on the place, like at one place and one time, place and time, so both. There's one mode is predominant at one place at one time, and then it always changes, and then another mode. And so what to speak, if that is like that, then of course the living entity, our desires always evolve, our material desires, because we can also understand from the viewpoint that because nothing is really satisfying, even if we fulfill a material desire, we are not satisfied. Maybe for a short moment we think we're satisfied, but then again we are dissatisfied, and then we look for something else. And so naturally always we change our desires, and because that is happening like this, so also then we always change the bodies. And of course also because material bodies are temporary, they are not Satchidananda Vigraha, but rather full of pain and and temporary. It degrades. We know, like Prabhupada so many times, he actually makes this point very clear to understand that we shouldn't foolishly think, oh wow, birthday, such a great thing that we like to celebrate. So sweet how babies get born, but rather we should understand that from the day we get born, we die. We start to die. Every day we are dying. Our body is nearing its end with every moment, and it's just then at the time when then our, like in third canto, Lord Kapila describes when the time of like the reactions that we are due in one particular body to receive according to karma, when that ends, then that is death. Then we have to leave the body and then get another body. Or in other words, when the body is so decayed, like degenerated, that it cannot function anymore as the instrument for our actions. It's Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, the body is called kshetra, he calls it there, as a field of activities for the kshetranya, for the jiva who is embodied in that particular body. And along with, of course, the supreme kshetranya, the super soul. And so that's why we are the body is always changing, and in contrast to the Supreme Lord, whose body is never changing. Rather it is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and actually eternally his beauty and all his opulences are eternally increasing. That's the nature of the spiritual nature. Whereas we are so limited. And so Prabhupada discussed on that point about then also from the viewpoint of that the Lord is never affected by any activities. Whereas we discussed that for the conditioned soul, whatever we do, whatever action we do in the material world is karma, unless we engage in devotional service or in other forms of yoga. That everything has its reaction. Whether it's a good action, then we get a good reaction, pious credits, or if it's a sinful action, then we get sinful reactions. So we cannot, we are simply, that's why we said we're bound by the three modes of nature and bound by our own activities. Whereas the Lord, whatever he does, even if it appears to be the same as other conditioned souls, when he appears as Krishna, Lord Ramachandra, or any other incarnation where he apparently just mingles with other human beings and acts just like them, also having wives and having family and being a king, all those things. But it is completely different, and that is so important to understand. In fact, we know that, like Prabhupada says, when once he was asked what's the most important verse of Bhagavad Gita, he said it is 4.9. Because this verse explains this importance of understanding Krishna as being completely transcendental, completely different from conditioned souls. And yeah, because simply by understanding that we won't take another body after giving up the body, but we'll go back to Godhead. As Krishna says, beautiful verse, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vetti tattvataha Tyaktvariham punar janma naiti mameta sarchana. So janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vetti tattvataha. So the second line actually is very, like he's emphasizing very clearly. So evam means certainly, yo, yaha, whoever, veti means who knows, and tattvataha. Tattva, we know that is a very clear word, meaning not just some insignificant truth, but tattva means like really conclusively important, like pertaining to the absolute truth, and then, yeah, to factually know. So one who factually knows that the janma and the karma, the birth, so the appearance of the Lord, like the birth, apparent birth of the Lord, that it is not a birth like us, conditioned souls, being forced into a particular material body, but rather, like, that part is particularly described in third canto also by Lord Kapiladiv about in the chapter, I think 31, or around there, about the movement of the living entities, where, because Mahada Devotee inquired about that as well, and so Lord Kapiladiv explains how the living entity, first of all, that we are, the soul comes into, as we said, according to the karma, according to the desires, into a particular semen of a particular father, and we know them by sexual intercourse. Then the semen, the soul being in the semen, gets pushed into the womb of a mother, and and suffer. And that's described that we suffer a lot actually as being in the womb, and then during birth as well. It's like such a painful event, but by the mercy of Maya we don't remember it, and then we go through our life looking for happiness still in material nature. But so the Lord's birth is not a birth like that at all. Rather it is by His sweet will an appearance, which He still, in order to interact in loving exchanges with His pure devotees, such as Mother Devaki, Mother Yashoda, that He still does apparently appear from their womb, or take shelter in their womb. But actually we know like that he actually first appeared in Vasudev's mind, and then from there went to Devaki's mind, and to the womb. But he is completely independent. He can do anything for his pleasure. But we need to understand that. That's why Krishna is saying himself that Janma Karma Chamet Divyam. It is Divyam. It is divine. It is transcendental. Nothing to do with what we are subjected to in the material world. And karma, as Prabhupada explained here about another famous verse from Bhagavad Gita, also in 4th chapter, 4.14, about that the Lord is never affected by the activities which He apparently performs. Namam karmani limpati. And name karma palespriha. So neither does He ever aspire for the fruits, karma phale, of His karma, of His activities. Because that is the nature of our activities, is that we, as conditioned souls, we do think that we are the doer foolishly, and because actually that is only due to false ego. Actually, we have only a small responsibility of our action, of our results, because we're dependent on so many other factors. As Krishna says, there are some 5 factors altogether. But still, we think that we are the doer, and thus we think that we are entitled to the results, to the fruits of our activities. And that's our motivation why we do engage in activities, especially why we go to work, for example. People work very hard to earn money and then to spend the money in a way to what they think as enjoyment. So this would be enjoyment. So that's the nature of the conditioned soul's activities. But Krishna, he doesn't engage in material karma. His karma, his activities is completely transcendental, and thus he never needs to aspire for getting certain fruits through his activities. He already has everything, and anything he likes, he gets it already, even without having to think about it. Simply his desire, his Icha Shakti, already arranges before. He doesn't have to wait or anything. That is about the Lord's karma, that is completely transcendental. And simply by understanding that, then tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti. So when tyaktva deham, when we give up this body, then tyaktva deham punarjanma, then there won't be another birth, but rather naiti mametis or Arjuna, you will go back to me, O Arjuna. Krishna tells to Arjuna that rather will go back to Godhead, to his personal abode as his eternal servants, devotees, also in the spiritual body, of course. Then, and so that is why it is so important that it is our life's mission to try to understand Krishna. Like my Guru Maharaj, many times he likes to emphasize on that and explain about this importance of understanding Krishna, because otherwise we, even as devotees, we might have the tendency, from the first time that we get into Krishna consciousness, then we understand the basic philosophy and we understand, I'm supposed to rather engage in devotional service, then I won't face all these bad karmic reactions, but I'll get some spiritual happiness, because that's the nature of the soul, to engage in service to the Lord. And so that's good, I'll try to do as much as I can. But no, it's not just like that. To really understand Krishna is not a cheap thing. We should always be eager to understand more deeply Krishna, and that's actually the nature of a devotee, that even the pure devotees, they never think and act that they fully understand Krishna. And actually we know it is not even possible, even for the greatest devotees, to fully understand Krishna, because Krishna is unlimited. Whereas all the devotees, his parts and parcels, they are limited, even in our liberated state. That's like such an important basic point to understand, that we're infinitesimal and the Lord is infinite. That it is not like the Mayavadis think, that we would ever come to a point where we are one with the Lord in quantity as well. We're only one in quality, as being originally spiritual and thus naturally full of bliss. But how we are full of that bliss, if we are acting under the spiritual energy of the Lord, which we are, if we don't desire anything separate from the Lord, any separate enjoyment, but simply desire the Lord's enjoyment and serve Him in that way. And so that's why it is so important trying to understand Krishna, and the devotee never thinks that he has understood Krishna, but rather even the greatest devotees, they are still so eager to always hear more and more about Krishna. And we will never come to the end of wanting to hear about Krishna. And So wanting to hear and glorify the Lord, hear about the Lord and glorify the Lord, that is a very basic nature of every single living entity. And that is why it is so beautiful and blissful also to simply read Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and Charitamrita and the other books, Srila Prabhupada, again and again. Because it is simply by doing that we can experience that it is not material first of all, and rather it is the nature of our real self, of our soul, to wanting to hear more and more about the Lord and about His devotees, because about His devotees means then automatically also about how the Lord has His loving dealings with them. And yes, so let's play if you look any other points the Prabhupada made, the purport. Here. And so Prabhupada mentioned about that he's full by his 6 opulences, his different potencies of wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge and renunciation, and thus he has no reason for physical exertion like the conditioned soul. So still about the point understanding the Lord's karma being completely different from our karma. That's another angle to understand, that we might work very hard, but we are in a material body, we are so limited, and we have to physically exert us and get exhausted after some time. And where's the Lord? Even though He's actually the doer of everything ultimately, like everything comes from Him. He created the whole spiritual world as well as the material world, and we know, and material world is even like it created again and again. I mean, it's perpetually, and so innumerable universes. So imagine like how much the Lord has to do, so to say, if you look from that perspective. But still, He never exerts at all. Like there's no possibility of the Lord's ever having to exert Himself. Rather, we know Krishna being the summum bonum, meaning that everything emanates from Him, but still He's completely full. Which means that He has all these unlimited potencies, and they perfectly conduct everything by His desire, including the creation and all of that. But still, it doesn't. He Himself doesn't have to do anything. In fact, and that's another bewildering thing for non-devotees, that the Lord actually He wouldn't have to do anything. He could just lie down and be fully blissful, and everything is happening perfectly simply by His will. He doesn't even have to think about it. But then why does the Lord act? But still He does act simply for His pleasure, and namely particularly simply to always increase the unconditional love that He is getting from all the different jivas. And that's what's so bewildering to the non-devotees, because they see how Krishna, He did so many things here in the material world also. He even was on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He apparently had to do politics and so much struggle in one sense, if you look from a material perspective. But actually, we know, anything that Krishna does, He only does it for His pleasure, and He particularly for the pleasure of His devotees and with His devotees. And so, and even when He does all that, there's never a question of Himself exerting Himself. If He does exhibit such pastimes where He does apparently get tired, like even in Vrindavan, for example, with the cowboys, when He plays in the forest, Krishna apparently He does get tired. Or in fact, for the sake of His pure loving exchanges with those devotees, Krishna, by the arrangement of Yugamaya, He does get tired in the pastime, just so that He then has an excuse to lie down on the lap of Lord Balaram or another Gopa and receive some service from them, getting fanned or things like that. So from the Lila perspective, for example, he does get tired, but of course we know from the absolute perspective of knowing him to be the Supreme Lord, he never gets exerted or anything. But for his pleasure, he can exhibit like that. And yeah, as we know, as with all other aspects, for example, being afraid of Mother Yashoda, even though, of course, there's no possibility of him actually being afraid as the Supreme Lord of anyone, or rather, fear personified is afraid of him. But yeah, that's then all those. But all those things we should understand, and we should relish to the Lord's transcendental nature. And simply by doing that, we'll, as Krishna promises, we will go back to Him rather than having to take a material body again, struggling with our karma, with our wanting to get material enjoyment by doing certain activities. So, and then Prabhupada concludes that, but we discussed it before about Lord Vishnu, Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. And thus Brahma creates the different species of life all over the universe, which means that the Lord creates the whole manifestation either by Himself or through the agency of His authorized deputies. So we discussed that sometimes the Lord also has to take, or does take the post of Lord Brahma when a Jiva is not qualified in one universe for that post. And so, a few minutes we can touch on. Transcendent. The verse itself is actually very beautiful. So, where it's mentioned also that transcendental variegatedness. Because that's verse that's so beautiful also in Bhakti, that spiritual nature has unlimited variety, and Krishna and the spiritual world and the devotees and the ways how he interacts with his devotees, it's all in unlimited variety. Rather, whereas nowadays the people who are a little inclined to spirituality, most of them they believe in this Mayavad conception that ultimately we are all one, and because the only concern and understanding is the material life, it's full of misery, all these relationships, all these differences. So if we are all one, then there's no miseries, and it's all nice. But actually, no, that's very unfortunate that people have only think that to be the absolute truth, because it completely inhibits them from any possibility to engage in loving exchanges with the Lord, and they're devoid of knowledge of all this unlimited transcendental variegatedness. Because if we understand that, that's another point why we need to wanting to understand Krishna more and more. Because the more we do understand Him and His abode, His devotees, His associates, and His name form pastimes, the more naturally we will become more and more attracted, more and more eager to wanting to simply engage in that, and we'll like yesterday, Vajrayana Krishna Prabhu, he discussed about this learning to accept the mercy rather than simply rejecting material life. So naturally then we won't get attracted by the lower taste, but we will more and more eagerly engage in devotional service and simply wanting to be an object of pleasure of the Lord. So, one time. Thank you for attention. Grantara Chima Bhaktam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.